In this photo deconstruction, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of a sultry fetish fashion shoot using 2 lights. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. This past year I had the opportunity to put on a fetish fashion intensive workshop, and I worked with incredible models and beautiful styling. And the goal of the workshop was to create images that were sexy, sultry, but more than just that. I wanted them to be elevated, to tell a story. And so today I want to take you behind the scenes of one of the images that we were able to create. And I love this shot because it has so many beautiful things going on, from the styling to the expressions of the model to the dynamic poses and of course the lighting. So let's pop behind the scenes and I will show you exactly what we did. This image was created with just 2 strobes, but before we get to the lighting, I did want to talk a little bit about the set and the styling. So these are 2 of my incredible models, Kenzie Ann and Brianna Ashley. And Brianna actually put on the fetish workshop with me. She's the one that helped bring together the models and the styling, and she has a passion for fashion inspired by fetish. So she was the expert behind many of these concepts. All right, so these 2 models, they know each other, and I knew that they would be great posing together because they already have a rapport. When Kenzie had this beautiful vintage outfit, I wanted to be able to complement it with the background. So that's actually where I began. I looked at her piece, and Brianna's outfit was black, so I knew it was a little bit more neutral. So seeing that kind of skin tone, pinky vintage outfit on Kenzie, I selected a Savage Universal coral background, which is kind of like a light pink. From there, I wanted to spotlight the girls. I thought that it looked really cinematic, theatrical, almost like they were on stage for burlesque, which is why I chose my main light as the Westcott Optical Spot. Now, this modifier attaches and allows me to give that circular highlight with no modification at all, just the kit lens. So that one modifier, plug it in, and I have my beautiful spotlight. But then, all of the area around that spotlight and the shadows on their bodies would fall to deep dark black, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to have some life and detail to the shadows, which is why I added a second strobe that you see down here, which is a bare bulb, no modifier, with a cyan gel. I know from experience that when I add cyan and layer it onto pink, it has this really beautiful vintagey effect that is inspired by a photographer that I love, Miles Aldridge. So that was kind of where the inspiration came from. So the optical spot for the spotlight on them, then the bare bulb with the cyan gel filling in the shadows, and I'm going to show you what it looked like in camera. Now, before I pop over and show you the raw image, let's take a look at the gear. So for this image, I was shooting with the Canon R5 and my go-to studio lens, the 24-105. And I used pretty standard studio settings, 1/200th of a second, f8, ISO 250. All right, so let's take a look at that raw image. This is where we began. And honestly, it's looking really beautiful out of camera. I love the expression. Now let me just talk about just a little bit about the composition. You can see Brianna's leg in the bottom right-hand corner. This creates a strong diagonal line that leads you up towards Kenzie's face. Then you also have Kenzie's legs, which create another diagonal. And so this composition is very much a triangle. And so the base is stable, but it leads you up to their heads. And then if you look, from her hand to their faces, back down her arm, it continuously brings your eye around the frame over and over again. And so that's why I chose this shot. I have many that I really liked. In fact, there were several other images of this series that I retouched, and I think they tell a really fun story. But this is the one that I thought had such beautiful compositional lines. All right, so this image is straight out of camera, but I already knew that I wanted something a little bit more vintage in feel. And then also looking at this shot, I thought that the legs were a little bit too dark. I wanted to be able to continue the lines, and I feel like they start to fall to shadow too much. So 2 main goals is have a little bit more of a vintage toning and bring up detail in the shadows. So I started to do my raw processing in Capture One, and this is where I took it. I lightened up the skin tones, I filled in the shadows at the bottom of the frame, and it already has a much more vintage feel. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that color grading. Before I do, however, I did want to show you what the end shot looked like. So as I looked at this image, there were a few things I wanted to change. For some reason, I felt like the shadows of the hands sticking out of the leg here became a really abrupt distraction. It broke up the flow of the composition. So I knew I wanted to remove that. I also saw a couple lines or wrinkles that were not quite as smooth as I'd like, maybe the smushed thigh on the stool. But other than that, I already love it, and I would be happy to show this image as is with no retouching. These 2 girls are perfection, so of course they don't need much in post. But I always like to do finishing touches, and so this is what was done in Photoshop. So I got rid of, a little bit of the garter that was hanging out, getting rid of some shadows that I found that was distracting, and smoothing out any areas that were creating weird shadows on the background. So straight out of camera in the final image. So let me just show you in Capture One what I did for the color grading. We're going to look over at the left-hand panel here, and I want to show you some of the major adjustments. And they were primarily done in color balance. Color balance is where I can change the color that appears in the highlights, midtones, and shadows, simply by dragging this little circle. Now, this is probably pretty unexpected, but what I ended up doing is adding a cyan green to the skin tone. And this is because it looks like a certain type of vintage film when the film has aged. Sometimes it'll have this greening effect in the highlights. And so that's how I was able to emulate the feel of vintage film. In the shadows, I added a little bit of blue. I had neutral midtones. So when I look at this image, it has blue-purple as the background because it's the blue film mixing with the pink. You've got pink here and then kind of a cyan green to the skin tone. So what that gives me is something called an analogous color scheme. So if you look, pinks, purples, blues, cyans, they're all next to each other on the color wheel. So everything is cool and calming, and that's why it has a very relaxing effect. There aren't any other colors that are dramatically popping out of the frame. Now, one other variation I could have taken on this, instead of going for the cyan blue skin tone, I could have also gone for a much warmer look and added yellow to the highlights. This also works because it's another look of yellowing film, and it's giving me, again, that very vintage look. So both of them would have been fine. I just thought that the cyan green was looking a little bit edgier. So all of that was done in Capture One. And only one more detail, I didn't think there was enough information in the shadows, so all I did is drag up the shadows, boom, quickly there, and I could see the beautiful highlights on their legs and bring more depth and dimension back to the shadow area. Looking at this image, this is everything that I want out of a fetish fashion shoot. I think it looks vintage, classy, elevated, but sexy, risque. I like the composition, the lighting, and the way that they are interacting. So it's more than just one element. It's not just a sexy girl standing in front of the camera. Instead, it's all of these elements working together. Now, if you'd like to join me for a fetish fashion workshop, be sure to visit learnwithlindsay.com and go to the workshop section. I have new dates posted and there are seats available. And again, Brianna will be helping me to produce this event with incredible models. If you've enjoyed watching each part of the process, from the lighting to the concept to the color grading, and you'd like to see more of this, I recommend you check out my Learn Plus membership platform. And I have links to that in the description below. Every month I pick a different theme, and I shoot several looks on this theme. I invite you to look over my shoulder as I plan the concepts, as I light it, as I direct the subjects, and you can see as I am color grading, as I am shooting. So if these are things you'd enjoy to see a little bit more in detail, you'll definitely want to check that out. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this fetish fashion photo deconstruction, and I will see you next time.